Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo, and I have no idea what episode this is. We're in the 160s somewhere now. We've done a lot of episodes, and David is out this week, so it's me and Mike, and in the next coming few episodes, we'll have some special guests, so that's exciting. Cindy Crum. But for now, we want to talk about sort of two big topics. One is fraudulent reviews on Google and the consequences of that and what Google should be doing. And then Mike has identified, we've been doing a big research project in Europe, looking at SERPs, and there's some interesting things coming out of that. Plus Mike has discovered a new experimental AI overviews page for local, and we'll be talking about that and the difference between the SERP in Europe and in the US now. So Mike, why don't you tell us about the plastic surgery fake reviews issue that you wrote an article about this week.
Sure. So Allure Esthetics and Dr. Sagan were convicted in federal court in April of violating the Consumer Review Fairness Act, which federally prohibits businesses from preventing their customers from leaving reviews. He violated that act. They found 21,000 clients that had to sign a non-disclosure agreement agreeing not to
clarify
leave reviews.
To clarify, the act does not prohibit fake reviews or doesn't punish fake reviews. It's just the merchant's attempt to suppress or prevent customers from writing reviews.
Right. And in addition, the Attorney General of Washington charged him with paying incentives for people to take negative reviews down, having fake reviews left by his staff and his marketing people, having done fake before, exaggerated after images, before and after images. So he's also accused of a number of advertising violations, fraud, in addition to the NDAs. One of the reasons this was a much easier slam dunk in terms of the legal situation was because it was a violation of federal law. It could be taken to federal court, and the judge ruled summarily that he was in fact guilty of violating this 2016 law. And then last week, that he signed a consent decree for he paid $5 million, $1.5 million of which is going to be used for affected customers are going to be reimbursed for, because they were also charged before they signed the NDA. They were charged $100 to fill in the paperwork. Bizarre. And charged $500, and they agreed to stop all of these egregious activities. What I find, that's the story. What I find fascinating about the story is you go to Google, he's still got a 4.8. He has more reviews now than he had in April when he was convicted. You go to Yelp, he's got a 4.6. While Yelp did put up in April an alert that he's been accused of these crimes, they didn't take down many of the positives. So he's still benefiting from his positive search reputation. And the other question I have is a $5 million fine big enough? Right? $5 million is a significant amount of money to most of us. And certainly the biggest fine we've seen. Now, this case, again, was unique because it actually violated federal law. But when you do the math on this, it turned out the Attorney General is seeking restitution for 21,000 people. So that's just the people who signed the NDAs. So that turns out to $238 for every violation, which doesn't seem very much. But that doesn't include the lost business for all the other businesses, the number of people who went to him or considered going to him because of fake reviews. There's all these other costs to society that aren't being even accounted for. Plus, you look at his income. This guy has multiple locations. Typically an aesthetic surgeon makes
he's probably making millions of dollars a year.
$1 million a year, and has been on the back of this obviously egregious review campaign for at least 7 years, right? So is a $5 million fine big enough? So those are just interesting questions to me.
Well, what about anything about the AMA or whatever board certifies him, or the local Washington licensing? He should be his license should be suspended or revoked, because this goes to his ethics, right?
Turns out he's not licensed by the plastic surgeon, National Plastic Surgery Board. He is licensed on at a lower level as a surgeon, but not as a plastic surgeon. So even his licensing is questionable. So
but he has a medical license, fundamentally, his MD,
yes,
which is granted by Washington wherever he's practicing,
right,
and that really should be suspended or revoked on the basis of his fraud and consumer deception.
Yeah, it's possible. I know I've read that there is some movement in that area, but I don't know. I don't think it's obvious.
So let's talk about Google and its relationship to these reviews. So we've talked about fake reviews a lot, independent of our conversations. I've done some work with Curtis Boyd of the Transparency Company on fake reviews. He's done a lot of sort of work there. Fake reviews are rampant, notwithstanding whatever new algorithms, notwithstanding whatever verbal commitments Google and others have made. Fake reviews are quite common. And we don't need to unpack all of this, but there's a sort of a spectrum of egregiousness. And this guy's kind of on the extreme side of it. And,
both in terms, it's on the extreme side, both in terms of his actions, as well as impact on the consuming public.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And so when we talk about fake reviews in the abstract, people tend to think, oh, some restaurant or HVAC guy, the consequences of choosing the wrong vendor are marginal. Get a bad pizza, or I have to pay somebody to do some repair work in my house where merchant number one didn't do a good job. But in the case of certain categories like medical, healthcare, or legal, the consequences to the consumer can be quite serious. I mean, if you have somebody cut into your body to take something out or change something, you can't go back. And so this guy, through his kind of systematic deception, has not only gotten better rankings, right? He's got more reviews and higher volume, which is what people look at. They look at the score and they look at the volume, and he's showing up. So it's this kind of flywheel of ranking and customers and so on and so forth. And as you say, people aren't going to ethical doctors as a result of this, or fewer people are. And somebody has had their face or their butt or their whatever body part altered in reliance on these reviews, and not to mention spending whatever thousands and thousands of dollars. And so this is a pretty outrageous situation. The fact that Google has done nothing is part of their kind of indifference. They would of course decry that characterization, but their indifference to the consumer harm that's going on by not being more diligent about addressing these reviews. Now they have their blog posts that they took down X million fake reviews or terms violating reviews, but obviously the awareness of this case, which we can talk about, were they aware, were they not aware, and their failure to remove the reviews even upon conviction, speaks to their sense of impunity vis-a-vis Section 230. We don't have to do anything because there's no liability here at all. We don't care.
And it does raise the question, one, were they aware? And two, were they possibly leaving it up as evidence or something? I don't know. It's hard to believe that they weren't aware, because the Attorney General did a very thorough investigation. Part of that is obviously has to be reaching out to Google for the data, for the background, to understand who these people, who some of the posters work for, because in the original complaint, it was clear he knew that some of the original marketers working for this company and the employees were leaving reviews. Well, would he know that if he didn't look at IP numbers, that sort of stuff? And so clearly he had to have reached out to Google Legal in this case. So Google had to know at some level that this was going on. This has been widely in the press, and we've reported on it. Google has to know. So the question is, does that knowledge increase? It certainly increases their moral obligation. Does it increase their legal obligation? Not under Section 230.
No, not at all. Under Section 230, they have no obligation to do anything because they can't be sued. I mean, there's no, I think that I mean a lot of things are going through my head right now, so coming again, sorry. I think what we need is we need a copyright like notice and takedown kind of rule for platforms like Google and Yelp and TripAdvisor and others, which should say something like, and it should be it should be an explicit limit on Section 230 protection. If you are made aware of,
defamation case,
whatever, right,
illegal review case,
right, and put aside that Google is not a judicial body, but if you are made aware of this violating event and you fail to act within some period of time, 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, and I think this exists in some of the regulations in Europe, then you can be held liable for damages that can be proven by an individual or by a business. And I think that is the only way to really get Google's attention. We cannot expect Google to know everything about all of the reviews, the millions of reviews on its platform. That would be unreasonable.
Their vaunted AI isn't good enough to detect.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. They can't be held to some strict liability standard.
No, but they should be held to an audit. We should be able to know how accurate their algorithm is. We should be able to say
that's a different issue. That's a different issue than what I'm describing.
I get it, but they should be held accountable on both ends. From my point of view.
So once they become aware, so let's say there's a conviction or there's some legal complaint or whatever the threshold criteria are, once they are shown that, then the clock starts running and they have an obligation to remove the offending material within a certain time frame. And if they fail to do that, then there's some consequence to that. And I think that unless there's something like that exists, whether in regulatory language or new statute or some judicial decision or whatever, unless there's some framework like that, Google is just going to do stuff on its own. It may enforce, it may not enforce, and people in the real world get harmed.
And continue to get harmed. I mean, I think it's the type of modification to Section 230 that would leave the bulk of the benefit of 230 intact.
Exactly.
While still putting some responsibility back on the platforms.
That's right.
Once some standard has been broken, they then have an obligation. I think that, to me, that's the kind of
just reasonable. That's
reform.
The copyright. That's the copyright rule, I believe.
Right.
That you once you're made aware of a copyright violation with whatever proof is required, then they have an obligation to take down the offending material. I think I
agree.
Okay, then since we agree.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.